Okay, so I think we are up to the bottom of Lama Dalet Amud Beis at the 2 dots, 3 lines up from the bottom. Sound right? Yeah. Okay. I think we got down 2 dots yesterday. Okay. So the Mishnah said. So we just got done talking about how we know that by monetary law you can judge in the day and finish off at night. So there's a debate about that. Now we're up to the better capital cases. So say din nefashos, capital cases. Danin b'yom, you judge in the day, and you have to finish in the day. Doesn't quote that part, but that's what it's saying. Minani mili, how do we know that the capital cases have to be in the day? Omer of Simi Bar Chia, Omer Kra. Rav Simi Bar Chia says the verse says, "Hoka Sam Lashem Neged Hashemesh," and you should execute them in front of the sun. So when it says in front of the sun, that means while the sun is lit, the execution has to happen in the day, and that means the verdict goes straight to execution. So the verdict is in the day. We'll talk more about that later. Amar Rav Chisda. Rav Chisda says, "Minayin lehoka shehi taliyah." How do we know when it says this word haka means taliyah? It means hanging. That these people were hanging. Now we mentioned earlier. No, sorry. Later in the Masechta. Sorry, Mishnah we did it earlier. But later in the Masechta it talks about that is a debate who exactly gets hanged. But hanging is done after execution. They first execute people by stoning, and then they hang them as a symbol, and usually done it's supposed to be done very quickly. You hang them and then you bury them immediately after you hang. One person ties them, one person unties, and you bury them. But debate who exactly gets hanged, but it's after the execution. And it says you hang them up in front of the sun. So now I'm asking, how do we know this word hokah? How do you know that means hanging? Diksiv, Pasuk says, it says, and they hang them in for Hashem in Givashul. The story there is that in the time of King David, there was a famine, and he asked Hashem, "What's the reason for this famine?" He said, "There's 2 reasons for the famine. Number 1 is that after Shaul died, they didn't eulogize him appropriately." And the second reason was that Shaul HaMelech had killed the city of Nov full of Kohanim. When the city of Nov was killed, there were not so many Kohanim to work in where they didn't have a basic picture. They had a bomb called a Bama Gedola, the central altar, and there wasn't as much work. There weren't as many Kohanim to work there, so there weren't as many Karbanos. There's a group of people called the Givonim, or also known as the Nesinim, that had used trickery to convert to Judaism. They pretended to be, they lied and said they were from far away, and they're really one of the Canaanite nations that were close by. And they said and in the end, the compromise they made was you can join the Jewish people, but you're cursed to work for the Mizbeach. You're going to draw water and cut wood for the Mizbeach. When the Kohanim were killed, these Givonim found themselves out of work, and they had no jobs. There was the family. Many of them got killed. And so Hashem said, there's a famine now in retribution for the Givonim, what was done to them. That they lost their livelihood. And so they tried to appease them, and they said, "What can we do? What'll make you forgive the Jewish people for this?" Said the only thing we want is blood. We want King Saul did this, so we want to execute. I don't remember what number it was, but several of his descendants. And they did that. They executed several of King Saul's descendants, and they hang them up publicly, as we'll see, for a very long time. It says the Hukanim Hashem, they hang them up for Hashem, Hashem, of Shaul, who is the chosen one of Hashem. They hang them up there in the place. The Ksiv and Pasuk also says Ritzvah Bas Aya. Ritzvah Bas Aya was a concubine of King Saul. As a sock, and she took a bag, Vatateu la elatzur, Katzir. And she took it to a boulder at the beginning of the harvest. And she basically sat there with a sling, and anytime the birds tried to kill any of the people who are hanging there, she shoot the birds away. So she protected them. See that they're hanging up. But see, another verse says, Moshe says, Moshe, Kach is called Rosh Am, take all the heads of the nation, and you should hang them up in front of there's the original verse we said. That's the same possibly quote earlier. take all the heads of the nation and hang them up in front of the sun. It says, hold on a second, hang up the heads of the nation. If the nation itself sinned, what do the heads do? The heads were the ones sinning. Why are we executing them and hanging them? Rabbi Yehudah says the name Rav. Hashem said to Moshe, divide them up into basins. So it doesn't mean hang the heads. It means take the heads of the nation and hang them, the perpetrators. Let me put my keys on it again. That helped yesterday, I think. Just enough weight. Hang the perpetrators up in front of the sun. So it says, take the heads of the nation and divide them into based in, and then hang the perpetrators, not hang the heads, but hang the perpetrators in front of the sun. And it says, my time, what's the reason? Why do you need so many based in? One should be enough. Why do you need to take all the heads of the nation and make a lot of batei din? Maybe the reason is mishum she'ein danin shnaim yom echad. There's a rule that we'll see later on in the Masechta that you can't judge two murders on this. You can't judge two capital cases on the same day. So that's why you have to have a lot of batei din, because there are a lot of people who are guilty here. This is during the episode of Bilam. Right. So what happened was they hired Bilam to curse the Jewish people. Mm-hmm. That didn't work. They said, I'll give you some advice. The God of the Jewish people doesn't like adultery and idolatry. So what did they do? He said a whole scheme. They had two women come. One was old and one was beautiful. The old one would always say a high price. The younger one would say, would sit like they had in the inner room in the shop. You call out, I'll sell it to you for even less than that. Bidding, between toward them, the people started to come into the inner room and deal with the younger one. And they said, so I'd say, they came several times. They said, come have a seat, drink some wine. This is before you were not allowed to drink wine with the non-Jews. And they drink the wine, and then she'd seduce him, and then say, but you want to be with me, you have to worship this idol, and what do you have to do? Go to the bathroom on it? So that's nothing. And Hashem got very angry, and many people died. So they did idolatry. They did adultery, and so there are many people liable to death. But the rule is, so you can't judge multiple people on one day. Maybe if that's why you need it. The Hamar of Chisra said, "Lo shanu ela b'shtei misos." That's only true when it's two different death penalty cases. But if it's the same death penalty case multiplied by multiple people, that you're allowed to judge in the same day. The whole idea is you can only focus on one set of rules at a time. So you're busy thinking about this case, you can't think about that case. But when it's all the same case, then you can think. Then they can do that, even though they're different people, but it's the same punishment, same crime. Then they can judge more than one. So why do you need so many batei din? There's one crime of idolatry. So why? Because idolatry, incest, what's it called? Adultery with a non-Jew is not a capital offense. At least not one of the base next to. It's only idolatry here. It's only one crime. So why do you need so many batei din? Is rather the reason you need so many batei din is to do it quickly to show Hashem that the whole Jewish people is getting together to kill the perpetrators. And that'll calm Hashem's anger down. They want to have a lot of, you need a lot of batei din working just to show Hashem how we're taking this seriously and getting rid of the people who did avodah zarah. Okay, moving on. It says, it says in monetary law, you finish the same day. In capital cases, you finish the next day. It says, how do we know that you're supposed to wait till the next day of the capital cases? Amar Mechanina says, the verse says, Mileasi mishpat, I filled it with judgment. Tzedek yalin ba. Said righteousness will spend the night on it. But you're murderers. What we see is that with righteousness it stays overnight, meaning you wait. Rava Amar Mihacha. Rava says from this verse, Ishru chamotz. You should praise the chamotz. Chamotz is vinegar. You can also learn an idea of delaying. When you pickle something, it slows down. So it says, praise the ones who slow it down. What does it mean? Ashrei dayan, praiseworthy is a judge, shemechametz es dino, that he delays his judgment, doesn't judge right away. V'ida, the other opinion doesn't want to learn from that verse. It says, Ishur chamotz can also mean the victim. It says, right, you should fix up the victim, lo chometz, and not the perpetrator. You should help the victim and not the perpetrator. Now, what does that mean? So the basic way it works is that if the victim sues the perpetrator, the alleged perpetrator, and the alleged perpetrator, let's say in monetary law, so the defendant turns around and say, but I have a counterclaim against you. You first judge the original claim, and then you judge a counterclaim. You don't view it as one big case and view them both at once. You first judge the original claim and then judge the counterclaim. So debated where exactly that applies and in what scenario it is. A simplest scenario is, let's say, one person has clear evidence that they've been wrong. The other person says, but I have evidence. It's not only handy, but I have evidence. He owes me even more than what I owe him. Say, okay, if you don't have your evidence in front of you, then pay up what you owe, and then come back to court if they owe you money. Bring your proof and come back. But first, this is a clear case. You owe them money. You have to pay. You can't. We don't wait for someone to make a counterclaim. There are debates exactly when we say that, but we do the main claim before the counterclaim. The other opinion, filled it with judgment. My avidle. What does he do with that? The first verse said, we learn that from this verse. It's righteousness delays. You should delay. And the second opinion, learn that from Ish Rechamotz, fix up the crime, or delay the crime, or praise the delayer. So the one who says we learn from praise the delayer, what do we do with this first verse? Where it said tzedek elin ba, that righteousness will dwell in it, which starts Malayasi Mishpat. What do we do with that? What does he use that verse? Can Rabbi Elazar, like Rabbi Elazar Amar Rav Yitzchak said the name of Yitzchak. Amar Rabbi Elazar Amar Rav Yitzchak. Rabbi Elazar said the name of Yitzchak. Kol tainish mlinin ba es tzedakah kilu shavei damim. Any fast day that they spend the night without giving out the tzedakah, they still have the tzedakah. Kilu shavei damim is like murder, because the Gemara says that the main reward of a fast day is the tzedakah that's given at the time of mincha. So they collect all this tzedakah at the time of mincha, and they don't actually do anything with it. They wait till morning to give it to the poor people. How do we know? Right. That's tantamount to murder. The poor people are waiting this charity, and you don't deliver right away, then that's tantamount to murder. Right. It says you righteous spends the night with it. That's like you're murderous. It says but that's when you collect bread and dates. But if what you collected was money and wheat and barley, which are not fit for immediate use anyway, and then waiting a little bit isn't such a big problem. You don't have to make sure you deliver right away after the fast, because it's just not as usable. You're collecting ready to eat food, you give it to poor people right away so they can eat it. Collecting money or wheat and barley that is going to be processed, they're not going to get it done that quickly anyway. You can wait till morning to give it to them. It says the Fikah, the Mishnah said, therefore, since you judge one day and finish the next, you can't judge on Friday or on Erev Yom Tov. Where it says, my time, what's the reason you can't judge on Friday or Erev Yom Tov? Mishum lo after, there's no way to do it. What are you supposed to do? You try and judge on Friday. Judge them on Friday and finish the court case on Friday. Maybe you'll find him guilty. And you're going to have to delay and wait till the next day to execute him, or then you have to finish the court case. So judge him on Friday and finish the court case on Saturday. And finish the court case on Shabbos. We just have the word dina. And execute him on Shabbos. The murder, meaning the execution, does not push aside Shabbos. You cannot execute someone on Shabbos. Why do you execute him at night? So, no, negative Shemesh. You have to. The execution itself has to be in front of the sun. So finish the court case on Saturday. And execute him on Sunday. So we're going to leave on someone on death row too long. The agony of it, we're not allowed to leave someone on death row even for one day. So if the judgment is delivered on Sunday, you execute him. If the judgment is delivered on Shabbos, you can't wait till Sunday to kill him. That's torture. What? It has to be the same day. Can't even do 24 hours later. It has to be same day. There's one who judgment on Friday, and issue the verdict on Sunday. Say minshi temayu, the people will forget their arguments. Even though there are two court stenographers that are standing there, and they write down the words of the people who find innocent, the words of the people who find guilty, so that we have a reminder they can't actually forget their arguments. Even though we write down what their words say, the heart of people they forget, meaning you can never write down everything a person's thinking. So they write down the basic arguments, but the reasoning behind it, everything, all their thought process, that you can't write down, that they're going to forget. Wait from Friday to Saturday, to Sunday, it's just too long, they're going to forget what they're saying. And so the justice will not be correct. Hilkach lo after. Therefore, it's not possible to judge someone on Friday. You have to wait till you have to start on Thursday. Amar le Reish Lakish Rabbi Yochanan. Reish Lakish says to Rabbi Yochanan, Tzvei Kfuris meis mitzvah docha Shabbos. Now here we're going to compare several mitzvahs, some of which you can do on Shabbos, some of which you can't, some of which take other people, other mitzvahs. We have a whole chain of which mitzvah is more important than which mitzvah, and we'll see it may turn to a vicious circle, but. It says, why don't we say that that burying a person who's dead without anyone to bury him, Docha Shabbos, you could even bury a person like that on Shabbos. Why Mikava Homer from a Kava Homer? What's a Kava Homer? Uma Avoda Shadocha Shabbos. What do we know about Avoda about Avoda, means serving the base of Mikdash? Shadocha Shabbos, you're allowed to do it on Shabbos, even though there are malachas involved in sacrifices, you still can do it on Shabbos. See, Avoda is more important than Shabbos. But burying a dead person pushes it aside, and we'll see how shortly. It says milachoso from the sister, when it says to a sister. Actually, we see it right now. So before we finish the thought, it says just like if when it comes to Avodah Zarah and Shabbos, Avodah Zarah pushes aside Shabbos. I mean, not Avodah Zarah, Avodah. Serving the base of Mikdash pushes aside Shabbos. And burying a person is more important than serving the base of Mikdash. We'll get to that soon. We'll learn that from Lechoso. Then we're eventually going to go through right now how we see it from Lechoso. But eventually the logic we're going to make is that Shabbos, which is less severe than Avodah, we see that you can do Avodah on Shabbos. So if you stop doing Avodah to bury someone, then for sure you'd break Shabbos to bury someone. That's what we're getting to. In the meantime, now we're saying, how do we know that you would stop doing the Avodah, the service of the base of Mikdash, to bury someone? So from Lachosa, from the sister. It says in the Brisa, that the Kohen should only contaminate himself for his father, his mother, his sister, brother, or sister. What do we learn from all these things? And the Gemara where this is originally quoted goes through a whole thing why we need each one. Once talking about a Kohen, once talking about a Kohen Gadol, once talking about a Nazir. It has a whole thing. How to know each one? What does each one teach us? That it basically each one teaches us that you can bury a dead person. Someone's on his way to shek the Karim Pesach, or to give his son Bris Milah. Just turn the page to Lam and Hayam and Beis at the top. Shama, and he heard Shemeis Lomez, and one of his close relatives died. Yachol Yitame. You might think he should contaminate himself. Amart, you'd say Lo Yitame. No, this is a Kohen Gadol. So this is a Kohen Gadol should not contaminate himself, even for all these relatives. Yachol, you might think Hashem She'enam Atami Lachoso, just like he doesn't contaminate himself for your sister. So too he would not contaminate himself to go to the funeral for a mace mitzvah for this person who's dead without anyone to bury him. So too he wouldn't do that because he's too holy. The verse says lachoso for his sister, for lachoso who do enamatami cannot contaminate himself for his sister. Tami the mace mitzvah. But he can't contaminate himself for the dead person, even though that means he won't be able to do service in the base of Mikdash. So if a Kohen Gadol can bury a random person he finds, even though that means he's not available to serve in the base of Mikdash, you see that burying someone is more important than the service. And we already established that the vote of serving Hashem is more important than Shabbos. So we say Shabbos, which is nidches b'fnei avoda, which is pushed aside because of the service, Isn't it logical that burying someone should push it aside, that should be allowed to bury someone on Shabbos? Amalei said back, no, execution will prove you wrong. That will break this kal v'chomer. Why? Shedochas avoda, because it pushes aside the avoda. If someone wants to serve in the base of managers, that we'll see later on, then we stop them and we say, no, we're going to execute you instead. We take him away from the service. So executing a person is more important than the service in the base of Mikdash. Shabbos, and still it does not break Shabbos. So we said if serving Hashem is more important than Shabbos, and burying a person is more important than serving Hashem, for sure burying a person is more important than Shabbos. So that doesn't work. Because we know executing a person is more important than service, is not more important than Shabbos. So just like this one is, that execution pushes aside service and doesn't push aside Shabbos, burying which pushes aside the service might also not doesn't push aside Shabbos. Where it says, it breaks Shabbos. That execution will push it aside, that you stop someone from doing the service to execute them. The verse says, even from my mizbech, from my altar, you should take him to die. That's talking about execution. So execution pushes aside avoda. Shabbos, and therefore Shabbos, avoda, push aside from the service, that you do the service even on Shabbos. So certainly execution is more important than Shabbos. You should be able to execute someone on Shabbos. So Amar Rava says, Kivar Paska Tan de Rabbi Yishmael. The Tana from the school of Rabbi Yishmael already addressed that. The Tana de Rabbi Yishmael, because the Tana of the school of Rabbi Yishmael said, Lo Savar Eish, you should not light fire. It says, in all your settlements. Matam alone, what does it come to teach us? Why does it have to say don't light a fire? Where it says, hold on a second, Matam alone, what's it teaching us? We know what it's teaching us. There's a famous debate about that. Either Rabbi Yossi, according to Rabbi Yossi, the law of yatzas. It's coming to distinguish it as a commandment. Let me explain. Yeah. So what does that mean? It means there are 39 malachas on Shabbos, and they're all included in the mitzvah of keep Shabbos. You should keep Shabbos, which is a negative commandment saying don't do work on Shabbos. Rabbi Yossi says the fact that it says and all that you should you wait on Shabbos and don't light fire on Shabbos. Why is it saying about lighting fire? It's one of the 39 malachas. Rabbi Yossi says to say it's a separate law, it's a separate commandment. There's only 38 malachas of Shabbos, and there's also you can't light fires on Shabbos, which is a separate commandment. What's the difference? The 38 malachas now have a death penalty. Lighting a fire is just a negative commandment, not a severe punishment. So all the other malachas are execution. Lighting fires is not. That's what Rabbi Yossi says. That's why it says don't light fires on Shabbos. So if it says don't light fires on Shabbos, it comes to tell you that it's a separate mitzvah. It's not going to tell you that you can't execute someone on Shabbos. Either Rabbi Nassan, but according to Rabbi Nassan, who argues in Yossi, Lachalak Yatzas, that this separate mitzvah of fire came to distinguish him up and say that someone who lights a fire on Shabbos gets a punishment of kares, it's a separate punishment of spiritual excision. So too, someone who does each one of them, each malacha, even up to all 39 malachas, it's that many times the punishment of kares, as many malachas he did. He gets one per malacha. So if he does multiple malachas, he gets multiple kares. What difference it makes is it's done by accident, he has to bring a carbon for each one. So Rabbi Yehudah says the fact he sings out fire and says fire is a violation of Shabbos is that each one of the malamates malachas, 39 malachas, is a violation of Shabbos. Just by accident bring a carbon for each one of them. So we already use this phrase, don't light fire on Shabbos, for these opinions. Like it says in the Brisa, Havar lelav yatzas, that Havara came out as a negative commandment to say that it's not subject to death penalty. Do you have Rabbi Yossi? That's what Rabbi Yossi says. That's the Omer lachalak yatzas. It came out to divide, distinguish, and say that each and every one gets his own carbon. So you can't say we learn out that you can't do execute someone from it when it says don't light fires on Shabbos. Rava says Tana Moshevos Kashile. Where it says from what it says later in the verse, it says in all your settlements. don't light fires in all your settlements. There's a general rule. Moshe was matam. What does this word say in all your settlements? What does it teach us? Mikli, hold on a second. Shabbos chovas agufhi. Shabbos is an obligation on the person, it's not an obligation on the land. Right? And anything that's an obligation on the person is not an obligation on the land, applies in Eretz Yisrael and not in Eretz Yisrael. So why does it have to say in all your settlements, even in the Chutz La'aretz? There's no reason to think it applies even only in Eretz Yisrael. Why does it have to go out of its way to tell us everywhere you live that you don't light fire on Shabbos? Why is that telling kids just to say it? So Moshe, why does it say this word Moshe? Mishum Rabbi Yishmael, in the name of Rabbi Yishmael, Amar Tamanecha, one student said, the verse says, a person will have a sin, Mishmat Mavis, a judgment of death. He should be executed. Shemayani, I hear from this, Bein Mechol Bein Meshabbos. That would be whether it's a weekday, whether it's Shabbos, you execute them. How do I fulfill Mechal Mosimas? Anyone in big Shabbos will be executed. The Shar Malachos by everything else, Chutz means is based in except for execution by based in. Says the opposite. A feeling based in, even execution on Shabbos, you can do execution on Shabbos. Mana Mekayim Mehumas. How do I read this verse? It says execute someone b'chol on a weekday of a lo b'Shabbos and not on Shabbos. Or maybe the opposite. Maybe it's execute someone even on Shabbos. So which way do you go? Which one is more important? You view the verse of don't do work as more important and execution gets pushed aside. The verse of execution is primary and don't do work on Shabbos is pushed aside. These verses are inherently contradictory. One says it's execute someone right away, and one says don't do malach on Shabbos. Which one wins? Tamalon, the verse says, don't light fires in all your settlements. Hana Omer, later on it says, all these things will be judgments of adjustment of statutes of justice in all your generations, and all your dwelling places. So Ma Moshe was Amor Lahalan based in. What do we know that about when it says the word Moshe was later on? That's referring to based in. Moshe was Amor Khan based in. Well, here when it says in all your settlements, that's referring to based in. It says don't light a fire in all your settlements. Don't light a fire even in based in. Means don't execute someone even in based in on Shabbos. Don't light fire in all your settlements. Mean don't execute someone on Shabbos. Now, Amar Abaye says, Hashta now, to Amar that you said, just lost the spot. Hashta ein ritzicha dochas Shabbos, that execution is not pushed at Shabbos. Based on this, ein ritzicha dochas avoda b'kav homer. Then execution should not push aside the avoda from a kav homer. What to kav homer? Uma Shabbos, what do we know about Shabbos? Shenidres from the avoda. That's not as important in the service. So you push aside Shabbos to avoda zara. But even Shabbos, which is weaker than the service of Hashem, is not pushed aside from by execution. So you don't execute someone on Shabbos, and avodah. So execution, Shabbos is more important than execution, and service to Hashem is more important than Shabbos, right? Eno din isn't logical. So certainly execution should not push aside the avodah. If Shabbos pushes aside execution, and the service pushes aside Shabbos, and certainly execution should not push aside service. So he says, so it says, take away from an altar to die. How do we learn that verse? It seems to contradict this Halva Homer. Carbon Yachid. That's by an individual carbon. Lo Dachi Shabbos. It doesn't push aside Shabbos. I mean, it says if someone tries to serve Hashem, you take away to kill them. That's only when they're serving the kind of carbon that doesn't break Shabbos. Because then you don't say avoda breaks Shabbos. And when is service not break Shabbos? By a private carbon, private sacrifice. The private person has a sacrifice, that doesn't push aside Shabbos. So there we'll say, take him away and execute him. But any public carbon that pushes aside Shabbos would say execution should not push that aside. That's Avaya's question. Amar Rava says back to him, based on your logic, lo say ritzicha dochel carbon, yachid. Even your logic would tell you that execution wouldn't push aside an individual carbon either. How so? Say ma Yom Tov. What do you know about Yom Tov? Carbon Yachid, that even Yom Tov, an individual can bring a carbon. So execution doesn't, you can't execute someone. Because we can't execute on Shabbos, you certainly can't execute on, we can't make it. It's from the same idea. Can't execute even on Yom Tov. So carbon Yachid, a singular carbon, Shudoches Yom Tov, that pushes aside Yom Tov, Eino Din isn't logical, Shlote Ritzicha Docha also. Isn't it logical that execution should not push it aside? Meaning, Abaye's logic was, we have a Kal V'chomer that says if service is better, if Shabbos is better than execution, and service is better than Shabbos, certainly service is better than execution. You can't push aside the service for execution. But we have a verse that says you can't. Because it says taking away from the Mizbeach. You have to do something with that verse. Say, we'll take that verse and apply it on a limited scope to an individual carbon. So an individual carbon, yes, that you can push aside to execute someone, but not a public carbon.
What's a private carbon versus?
So public carbon is a carbon that's obligated by the Jewish people.
Okay.
Private carbon is if one person says, I want to bring carbon to Hashem.
But you still do it at the altar.
Yeah. But that you wouldn't do on Shabbos. Carbon Yachid. So Rabbi says, even though the verse says you take someone away from this back to execute them, that we can say that's by a private carbon. By a public carbon, we won't apply that. Rava says, based on your logic, we can't even apply it by a private carbon, because the private carbon doesn't beat Yom Tov, and Yom Tov beats execution. So even a private carbon, you say execution doesn't beat a private carbon. And if you say that, the verse says you take someone away from his back to execute them. So if it's not a public carbon, it's not a private carbon, where are we going to apply that? You have to say the logic doesn't work, and this verse is coming to say, even though you have this logic, the Torah says otherwise, and you can even take someone away from his back to execute them. Meaning there has to be a way to apply this verse. If there's no way to apply the verse narrowly, then you just apply generally. It's coming to say, coming directly at the Kal V'chomer. As long as we don't have to say it's against the Kal V'chomer, I would prefer not to. But if we're forced to say, we'll say it. So Rabbi said we're not forced to say it goes against the Kal V'chomer. And Rabbi says yes, we are forced to say this verse goes against the Kal V'chomer. Therefore, the verse beats the Kal V'chomer. Where it says, hold on a second. Hanicha, this logic Rabbi said is that's fine. That you cannot bring a private sacrifice in Yom Tov. Ella, but Lamanda Amar, according to the one that says on Diamond and Navis Kriyim Yom Tov, that private sacrifices could be offered on Yom Tov. What can you say? Then you don't. This logic falls apart because we don't have a proof that you can bring a private carbon on Yom Tov. So if you don't have proof that you can bring a private carbon on Yom Tov, then Yom Tov beats Yom Tov beats execution, but we don't say that Yom Tov beats that service beats Yom Tov. Service doesn't beat private service doesn't beat Yom Tov, so the Kal V'chomer doesn't work. I mean, the Rava's argument against Abaye's Kal V'chomer doesn't work. Therefore, we leave Abaye's Kal V'chomer and say that according to the opinion that says you cannot bring a private sacrifice on Yom Tov, according to that opinion, we'll say that execution could occur we would say that you would not stop doing the service for public carbon, only for private carbon to execute some. El Amarav have a different logic. Lomi boy laman damin davas kivim Yom Tov. You don't need to ask me, according to the opinion that says you can bring private sacrifices on Yom Tov, for sure in that case the halom is kaim imim klal. There's no way to fulfill this verse that says take them away from your altar to execute them. There's no way to do it. For sure you wouldn't say this logic. Ella, rather, filu lamanda amin damin davas in kriyim Yom Tov, even according to the opinion that says you cannot bring private sacrifices on Yom Tov. Still you'd say no. You can take someone away from this verse. Still applies even for public. Why? Even for public sacrifice, you still say take someone away from the altar to execute them. The Pasuk says mi'im mizbechi, from my altar. What does it mean? My altar, mizbechi, my special altar that's designated for me. My ninu. What does it mean? My altar. Tell me the carbon. Tell me the daily sacrifice. From Rachamana, the verse says about that, from my Mizbeach, from my Mizbeach, you should take him to die, meaning even when they're doing a service to Hashem, it's an obligatory service, a public service, still you take him away from the Mizbeach to execute them. So even though Rav Abai is a Kal V'chomer, but the verse says explicitly that you still take someone away from public service to execute them. So Abai was saying you don't see, all it says is take someone away from service to execute someone. You say that's talking about service of an individual. It says no, it says mi mizbechi, from my mizbeach. That means even from a public service, you take someone away to execute them. So when a verse says something, we don't care about Kal V'chomer at that point. We say the verse beats any Kal V'chomer. The verse is clearly saying you take someone away from his back to execute them. So the Kal V'chomer doesn't matter.
Just real quick, so on Yom Tov, like you don't do the korban, you don't bring the special sacrifices, or
Right, you can't bring your own. According to one opinion, you cannot bring your own
what
sacrifice.
you can. That was there another.
That's the debate. That's the debate. Yeah, a Chol Hamoed you can. But
Chagiga, is that on Yom Tov?
right, so Chagiga, Evan agrees. Since a Chagiga is an obligation of the Yom Tov itself, you could bring a Chagiga on Yom Tov.
This is just something special.
Right, just yeah. Okay. Where it says Dini Amamos Vatameas Vatoros Matchilin Min Hagadol. That when it comes to monetary law and in matters of purity, impurity, etc., you start with the greatest rabbi there, gives his opinion first. Now we have a story here. Amar Rav. Rav says, Ana halai b'minyana. I was there when they made this ruling. This is a ruling that comes up in Masechtas Gittin, Tractate Gittin. But I was there when they made this ruling that was discussed. So this is a quote from another Gemara. I was there when they made this ruling. Debei Rabbi, in the house of Rabbi, in the yeshiva of Rabbi Yehudah Nasi, in his beis din. I was there when they made the ruling. Minai didi havu maskeli, and they start with me. They asked me to talk first. Bereisha, in the beginning. So I started talking. Now Rabbi Rav is much younger than Rabbi Yehudah Nasi. So he says, even though I'm much younger, and Rabbi Yehudah Nasi himself was there, they start with me. When it says V'hanan Tini Masnim, we said in our Mishnah, Maskim Managano, we start with the greatest judge, not with the least judge. Tanan, it says in the Mishnah, Anim Matkim Megadol Tanan, it says in our Mishnah, they start with the greatest judge. Amar Rava Bereda Rava. Rava says the name of Rava. Itema Rabbi Hillel Bereda the Rabbi or Valas, or maybe it was Rabbi Hillel, the name, the son of Rabbi Valas. Shani Minyan Debei Rabbi, the judge, the countings. You know what's the better word for than counting? But the roll, what?
Votes.
The voting of the school of Rebbe is different. The Kula Minyanai, all their countings, all their rolling, all their voting, they always start from the side, from the lesser judges. So just because of the humility of Rabbi Yehudah Nasi, he always put everyone else in front of him. He let everyone else talk first. So if you notice, anytime Rabbi Yehudah Nasi is quoted in the Mishnah, he's always quoted last. Yehudah Nasi wrote the Mishnayos. He still put it last. And also, he always, he was very humble. Yeah. So over there from the side. Fine. Now, once we mention Rabbi Yehudah Nasi, the greatness of Rabbi Yehudah Nasi, we have the tangent here that says, in most Moshe Vad Rebbe Lamatzinu Torah V'Gedulah V'Makom Echad. From the time of Moshe Rabbeinu until the time of Rabbi Yehudah Nasi, we didn't find greatness and Torah in one place. Meaning, we didn't find there was a singular leader of the Jewish people, an uncontested singular leader, both in Torah and in control of the Jewish people. In the whole history, from Moshe Rabbeinu up until Rabbi Yehudah Nasi, we never found Torah and greatness in the same person. Absolute greatness. It was one person in absolute control of the Jewish people. It's not true. Yeshua, what about Yeshua? He was a big Talmud Chacham, big scholar, and a leader. Hava Elazar, there's also Elazar, the Kohen Gadol, who was also great. Hava Pinchas, next generation down, there was Pinchas, was the leader of the Jewish people. There were elders at the same time as Pinchas. Hava Shaul, what about King Shaul? He was a big Talmud Chacham, he was the king. Hava Shmuel. The Shmuel was there. Shmuel overlapped with Shalom Melech. But Shmuel passed away and left Shalom Melech alone. His whole time, meaning the whole reign of Shaul, he was not by himself. There were times that Shmuel was there as well. So yes, there were certain times that Shaul had everything. We mean in the whole days he had everything, and that's just not true about King Shaul. V'hava David. What about David HaMelech? He was a leader and a big Torah scholar. Hava Ira Hayari. There was Ira Hayari who was there also. But he passed away before David HaMelech. Kula shanim kani amiran. He said all his lifetime we mean, and even though yes, there was a time that David Melech was absolute, but not his whole time as a king. Hava Shlomo. What about King Solomon? Hava Shimon ben Gera. The Shimon ben Gera was also a scholar. He was also at power at the same time. But Shlomo had him executed. Which we just mentioned last. Was it last week's Haftarah 2 weeks ago? That King Solomon said, "Make sure you execute Shimon ben Gera." I mean, King David said to King Solomon, and make sure you execute Shimon ben Gera. So King Shlomo executed him, so then he was left by himself. So I mean, when you mean this whole time, since there was some overlap between them, it doesn't count. What about Chizkiah? Have a Shivna. There's Shivna who had we'll see later on, he had more students than Chizkiah. I think Chizkiah had 11, basically, Bati Midrash, 11 groups of students, and Chizkiah had 13, and the Shivna had 13. For Iktel, but Shivna got killed. Shivna tried to switch allegiances and join up with Sanhedrin, and Hashem set it up that he had his whole 13 groups that tried to go out to make peace with Sanhedrin, and an angel came and shut the door right after Shivna, so all his 13 groups got locked inside, and Shivna went out by himself. Sanhedrin said, "What are you doing? What you said you promised me 13 armies." So they all backed out of it. So you're making fun of me, and Sanhedrin had him executed. So Shivna was dead. He got executed. Still, we say his whole time, and Chizkiah did not have power the whole time. Have Ezra, or about Ezra. Have Nehemiah was also great at that time. So Omer Ravada Barava. Barava says, Afani Omer, I also say, most Rebbe ad Rabbi Ashi, and from the time of Rabbi Yehudah Leib until Rabbi Ashi, no Matzin the Torah v'Gedul Makom Echad. We didn't find Torah and greatness in one place, so for the next period, from Rabbi Yehudah Leib till the end of the Gemara and Rabbi Ashi, we didn't find greatness in Torah in the same place. Below is not true. V'hava Huna bar Nasan. What about Huna bar Nasan, who is as great as Rav Ashi? No, Huna bar Nasan Mikav have a kaifei le the Rav Ashi. Even though he was great, he felt himself under the control of Rav Ashi, and therefore it does not count. And so you can say truthfully that from the time of Yehudah Leib till Rav Ashi, you do not find Torah and greatness in the same place. Have a wonderful morning.
What about the rest of the day?
Ashpa.
What? That too.
What?
So what about the rest of it?
Oh, the rest of the day.